This Semitic group of languages, where it started?
That's a controversial question.
What we're going to do now is you're just going to repeat your alphabet at the same time. So 1, 2, 3, start.
Alef, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Waw, Zayin, Chet, Wow.
It's always hard to give a linguistic definition of what's a language versus what's a dialect. That's more of a social and political question.
Welcome to Kedem. We are very glad to host today at the Kedem channel Dr. Benjamin Suchard from KU Leiden University in Belgium. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We all know the myth about the Tower of Babel. This myth tries to explain why people spoke in different languages. So the story of languages is actually, it's the main part of the society, the main part of our ability to communicate with each other. And why people actually do not speak in one language?
So this is the result of a natural process that affects any language, or a number of processes of language change. You can think of how slang today is probably different from when you were a teenager or when I was a teenager. That's something very noticeable, but there's also less noticeable changes in pronunciation, things in grammar, words that shift slightly in meaning without anyone really noticing. And over time, these pile up. If you look at especially a recorded speech or something from maybe a century ago, you'll notice many changes from how the language it's in is spoken today. If you look at a text from a few centuries ago, many words will be used differently. Sentences are built in ways that we can't do anymore. And that's just a product of how people learn language and of how people speak language. Now, if a language spreads over a large area or many different people, and you start to have different groups that aren't in direct contact so much anymore, maybe because they're far apart in space, or there's social reasons for them not to speak to each other so much. That means that changes that happen in the way some speakers speak don't get taken over by speakers in another group. And if you give that enough time, 5, 6, 7 centuries, 1,000 years, these languages will drift, or what used to be one dialect of one language can drift apart into many different dialects, many different languages that are no longer felt to be the same.
So it's always at the beginning there is a group of people who just start to use specific language, and then it's just how it's the process of the initiation of the language.
Well, humans have been using language for a long time, hundreds of thousands of years, and it's very hard to find the exact origins. What we can study with some more certainty is how languages have developed over the past several millennia, close to the beginning of writing, which is something that gives us direct information on how people spoke at that point. So what we can do is see how languages that split up relatively shortly before then came from one and the same ancestor that was spoken a few millennia before writing was invented. And there's different examples where we can see something like that, different families, such as the Semitic languages that are spoken in the Middle East and North and East Africa.
So this Semitic group of languages, where it started?
That's a controversial question, and one that a lot of research still needs to be done into, actually. If you look at the distribution of the Semitic languages, there's a lot in the Fertile Crescent. Arabic has spread to North Africa and slightly beyond even. And in Eritrea and Ethiopia, there's also these Semitic languages. So one of these places is probably where their oldest ancestor was spoken. And you'll find people arguing for, I think most scholars tend to argue for maybe the Levant, maybe somewhere in Arabia. There's also people that argue that Semitic spread from Ethiopia and crossed the Red Sea from west to east, and from there went all the way up the coast. But it's not entirely certain yet.
We're sitting currently in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and I speak Hebrew, many people speak Hebrew, and some other people speak Arabic language, and obviously we can understand many of the words, and we see that these languages are similar in many ways.
That's right, that's something that's obvious, I'd say, to anyone who speaks Hebrew and learns Arabic, or who speaks Arabic and starts learning Hebrew, that there's so many words that just sound the same and they mean the same as well. If you're greeting someone, shalom or salam obviously sound very similar. Counting, right, achad, shtaim, shalosh, arba, sounds very much like wahad, ithnain, talata, arba. And there's probably thousands of examples of words like that we could give. There's a nice video illustrating this by Alast Bahadur. Maybe we want to look at that together. He has an Arabic and Hebrew speaker trying to compare words like this.
Okay, so we're going to do Hebrew versus Arabic. And let's start off with introductions. So,
I'm Noah, and I'm from Israel.
I'm Shuruk and I'm from Egypt. Zaman.
Zman, time.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Lashon. Look at her.
Lashon.
Lashon.
Tongue.
Yes.
okay.
Yom.
A day.
Yes.
It's the same.
Yeah.
Dam.
Blood.
Yes. How do you say it?
Dam. Yeah.
Come on, give me something, Eze.
Nahr.
What?
Nahr. Not
Right.
nahar, but nahr.
So nahar, no.
Yeah, nahar is a different word.
Right.
Nahr.
So not river.
No.
Yeah.
River.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
Nahar in Hebrew is a river.
That's funny because nahar in Arabic is day, like the day.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
So a river, nahar in Hebrew.
Oh wow. Okay, there you go. She guessed it.
Nahar in Persian is lunch.
Really? That's so funny.
Hi, my name is Berta and I speak Assyrian Aramaic.
I'm Sidori and I speak Assyrian Aramaic.
I'm Hila and I speak Hebrew.
I'm Noah and I speak Hebrew.
Shinna or Sheta?
Shita,
Sheta or Shinna?
Shana, sleep.
Shata, drink. Shana, year.
Yes!
Yes. Bacha.
Cry.
Yes?
Yeah.
There you go.
How do you say?
Pchi.
Chaya.
Chaya. Yeah.
So a cry is bechi.
Yeah.
Bechia.
Thing.
Yeah, ours is Bechia.
Hi.
Zamara.
Singer.
Yeah.
Yes.
What we're gonna do now is you're just gonna repeat your alphabet at the same time. 1, 2, 3, start.
Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Waw, Zain, Chet, Tet, Yud, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ayin, Pe, Sadeh, Kof, Resh, Shin, Tau. Wow!
Good job.
So yeah, greetings, body parts, like bone, numbers, father, mother, son, daughter, lots of basic words that sound very similar. And a lot of people know that that's because Hebrew and Arabic are both so-called Semitic languages. Other Middle Eastern languages also belong to this family. What's a bit less known is that there's also Semitic languages spoken in Africa, apart from Arabic, especially in Ethiopia and Eritrea, where you have big languages like Amharic and Tigrinya, and a lot of much smaller languages as well. And here too we can find lots of examples where words in one language are very clearly related to words with the same meaning in other languages, as in this example.
Let's get started. Today we're going to compare two Semitic languages, Arabic and Amharic. And let's just start off with introductions.
My name's Sora and I speak Arabic. I'm from Iraq.
My name is Betty. I speak Amharic and I'm from Ethiopia.
First word, It says them.
Say it one more time.
It's them.
It's them?
No, the word is them.
Them?
Them.
Them.
D-A-M?
Blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Stop! Wow!
If you're shocked by that,
Yeah.
I don't know what you're gonna do by the
There's
end
more.
of this.
Sema. Sema. Sema.
Don't try to make it simple. Say it.
Oh.
Say it in Arabic
Yeah.
first, and then you can simplify it for her.
Sema?
Sema.
Sky.
Sky.
Oh, stop!
I know.
It's,
Oh, that's so. When you say sema, or is it semai?
Sema.
yeah. So like I said, the words aren't
Exactly the same, but
pronounced
that's
the
actually
same.
crazy that I'm
It's
guessing
just
some
the
of these. Yeah.
accent.
Okay.
He what?
One more time.
He what?
Hey, what?
It changes a bit.
Haya. Like life?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's haya.
Ours is he what?
It's the same.
cool.
It's the
Very
same
cool.
root.
Bait.
House.
That's what you say in there?
Okay.
There you go. That's
Okay.
This one is ayn.
One more time.
Ayn.
Eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
دقيقة.
A minute.
Yeah.
Dekika for us.
Dr. Suchard, so if I have a chance to have a time travel and I will go to 15th century BCE and I meet some person who speaks Akkadian language. And you know, I can speak some Hebrew, I understand Hebrew. What could I do with this guy? Could we understand each other? Could we become friends and discuss some issues?
I'm sure you could become friends. As you say, it's not a recent thing that Semitic languages have been spoken in the Middle East. Akkadian, the language of the Assyrians or the Babylonians, is already attested in the 23rd century BCE, I think, a very long time ago. And that's when the history of the Semitic languages in the Middle East, the recorded history at least, starts. We know Akkadian quite well because there's very many, especially Old Babylonian texts. And if you look at the language with knowledge of Hebrew or of Arabic, or probably of Tigrinya as well, you'll recognize, again, very many things. In Akkadian, a lot of the more throaty sounds have been lost, probably because the language was taken over by speakers of Sumerian that didn't have those sounds, and that they then got lost. So that affects the shape of words a bit, but well, again, shalamum is Akkadian for well-being. Just one example of a word that looks like the shalom and salam examples we started with. Also, with the grammar, there would be very much to recognize, but it would be a bit more different than Arabic in this example, because Akkadian, being spoken very far to the east in Mesopotamia, belongs to a different subgroup of Semitic. So these Assyrian and Babylonian dialects, Old Akkadian, which is the very oldest, and also Eblite from the city of Ebla in Syria. These Semitic languages that were recorded there belong to a family that scholars call East Semitic. And everything else belongs to West Semitic. That means that the grammar and sometimes the vocabulary of Akkadian and friends is often a bit different from what we know from other Semitic languages like Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, and other languages from there. If we want to look at that group, Hebrew has some ancient relatives that are grammatically very close to it. So then you can think of languages like Phoenician from present-day Lebanon, that's really so similar that if you know Hebrew, I think you can read Phoenician probably without much adaptation at all. That's so similar, you might just call it different dialects of the same language. There's Ugaritic from the city-state of Ugarit in Syria, near modern Latakia, which is also very close to these groups, less so than Phoenician. Phoenician and Hebrew are both Canaanite languages, so-called, and Ugaritic, even though sometimes it gets called Canaanite, linguistically is its own thing. And then there's the Aramaic languages, which have a very long history as well, 3,000 years of attested history. And those are also close to Canaanite and Ugaritic. Those languages are the Northwest Semitic languages.
It's interesting for me a question of how close, and I give you an example. For example, I could read the Moabic stone, with the inscription of Mesha.
Yeah.
And actually, I can read it quite well. I mean, for me, it's a bit outdated language. So
Sure.
I understand it's not a modern Hebrew, but it's like reading the Bible in the origin. More or less, it's the same. And you can easily understand what he's talking about without any translation, without any help, and just any Israel child, any Israel who is going to the school and speaks Hebrew can understand the Mesha stone inscription. So if I'm going to Ugarit, it would be that easy, or it would become more difficult?
It would be more difficult. Moabite, being from the kingdom of Moab, right next to Judah, is very, very close to Biblical Hebrew. Closer, I'd say, even than Phoenician. Ugaritic is clearly, like, you can understand a lot, but there's some things that are typically Canaanite or even typically shared between Hebrew and Moabite that Ugaritic does differently. And actually, Ugaritic and Phoenician sometimes share the same kind of coast Canaanite features, that where Hebrew shares more with what we know of Trans-Jordanian languages, which is very little. We have this Mesha stele, and we have a few inscriptions in Ammonite, and that's pretty much it. But those are really so close that I think it's
more or less one language.
It's more or less one language. It's always hard to give a linguistic definition of what's a language versus what's a dialect. That's more of a social and political question. And there's no doubt different reasons why scholars choose to refer to texts from Judah and Israel as Hebrew and those from Moab and Ammon as not Hebrew. But linguistically, it's very similar, and I don't think they would have had any problem understanding each other, Moabites and Judahites and Israelites.
Dr. Suchard, so the Bible actually preserves a very specific version of the Semitic language, which was spoken in the Judea and probably in Israel. So it's kind of northern version of the language. What we know about the southern languages?
Well, probably the majority of the Semitic languages were spoken further south than Israel. The biggest Semitic language today, of course, is Arabic, which people, probably due to the name among other things, associate with Arabia and Saudi Arabia. And its big spread, of course, is due to the rise of Islam in Western Saudi Arabia, what's today Saudi Arabia. But actually the oldest evidence for Arabic comes from further north, from the desert areas in Jordan and Syria, where there's tens of thousands of inscriptions on rocks, which have now been identified as old forms of Arabic. So something we can call Arabic was already around pretty far north, just outside the really well-cultivated, fertile areas, but right next door to that. And linguistically, there's a long-standing debate over whether Arabic should be classified as closer to these Northwest Semitic languages, like Canaanite and Aramaic and Ugaritic, in a Central Semitic group, or whether it's closer to the languages spoken further south, and that would then be a South Semitic group. That idea of South Semitic is now mostly abandoned, but there's still some scholars that support that. And the languages that it would be closer to in that case are those of the Horn of Africa that I've already mentioned. So we have today big languages like Amharic, Tigrinya, Tigray, and smaller ones as well. But also very importantly, classical Ethiopic, Ge'ez. This is the classical language of the kingdom of Aksum originally in late antiquity, and then of medieval and later Ethiopia. And it's a language of Ethiopic Christianity. It's a language I like very much. If you know Hebrew, you'll recognize a lot there as well. Like he came is bo'a, and he went away is wat'a. He went down warada, I think. Lots and lots of words where Arabic actually has a different form, but Giz, Classical Ethiopic, has something that's closer to Hebrew, closer to Akkadian, and closer to Proto-Semitic. So that's usually considered to be one group of Ethio-Semitic, even though it's very diverse, especially today. In Yemen, we have a number of ancient languages that are called Ancient South Arabian most of the time, the biggest of which is Sabaic, which is known from the Bible, not the language itself, but the Queen of Sheba is probably the Queen of Saba, the kingdom that ruled in Yemen for 1,000 years, if not more, and left us very many inscriptions in a beautiful script that we can read fairly well today, and that tell us about what life was like there. And there's a few other languages that are written in the same script that are then also classified as Ancient South Arabia, Ancient South Arabian. Then further east, there are some modern languages that are all endangered today, known as Modern South Arabian. And these are not particularly close to Ancient South Arabian as far as we know so far, or to Arabic. They're just spoken in Yemen and Oman. The biggest of those is Mehri, and there's a few others. I think all of the speakers pretty much also speak Arabic, and there's a lot of pressure to shift to local varieties of Arabic, or for the smaller languages to shift to Mehri. So linguists are right now doing their best to document as much of these languages as they can before they go extinct. But linguistically as well as culturally, they're very interesting and seem to be their own little branch of Semitic, which have preserved a lot of things, both in pronunciation and in grammar, that have changed in other parts of Semitic. So we've got our East Semitic languages in ancient Mesopotamia, we've got Northwest Semitic in the Levant, we've got Arabic and related languages in ancient North Arabia, Ethio-Semitic in Africa, ancient South Arabian, and modern South Arabian. And those are pretty much the Semitic languages.
So if we can speak about some kind of structure which is the Proto-Semitic was based on, can you explain, identify the original Semitic structure of languages?
The reason that all of these languages look so similar is not because they borrowed a lot of words from each other, sometimes they did, but it's because they all inherited a lot from their one shared ancestor, which we call Proto-Semitic, as the reconstructed ancestor of all the Semitic languages. Proto-Semitic had a lot of features that are very typical of Semitic languages, verbs having 3 consonants that they're built up of, and then vowels that change in different tenses of the verb, or you can derive nouns from the same root that just consists of 3 consonants. That's something you find in every Semitic language, and that's something that goes back to Proto-Semitic already. Some of the sounds are very typical, so something that many speakers of modern Hebrew have lost is the ha and a sounds, which are very prominent in Arabic. And you can also hear those in modern South Arabian, in Tigrinya, in modern Aramaic, in some dialects. And those are sounds that go back to Proto-Semitic as well, ch and g, a lot of throat sounds, guttural sounds as they're known. If we look at the pronunciation of the Semitic languages, the phonology, different languages have very different vowel systems, but all of them can be traced back, if you try, to a quite simple vowel system where you just had a, I, u, 3 different vowel qualities, and a long set, a, I, u, which is what classical Arabic has, more or less. You can get all the different, you can get the vowels of Biblical Hebrew from a simpler system like that. You can get the 7 vowels that all the Ethio-Semitic languages have from a 6 vowel system like that. So that's something that is quite typical of Proto-Semitic, to have those throaty sounds, simple vowels. There's some other interesting consonants that are typical of Semitic languages. Linguists call them the emphatic sounds. That's kind of a non-label. It doesn't really tell you anything about how they're pronounced because it's different in different languages. In Hebrew we have tet and kof, which no longer have a separate pronunciation, in modern Hebrew at least. In Arabic, those are pronounced with something in the throat going on, ta and qa. But we have evidence that the oldest pronunciation is one that's actually preserved in the Ethio-Semitic languages and in modern South Arabian as so-called ejectives, which means that you have a t and a k, and for the tsare or the sad, they have a ts. There was a t sound. There's already evidence from Akkadian, so from not millions, thousands of years ago, that Akkadian also had these realizations for the tet and the kof, more or less. So that's also something that we can reconstruct for Proto-Semitic that then develops in different ways in different languages. That's some things that we know about how Proto-Semitic was pronounced.
But how do you know how was this or that language pronounced, in fact?
Yeah, obviously we don't have recordings, so it's all a bit hypothetical. These are just our best guesses, but it's based on a combination of arguments. First of all, looking at how languages we know have changed over time. What's more likely, for sound A to turn into sound B, or for sound B to turn into sound A? And for instance, it's more likely that the t turned into the t that we have in modern Hebrew than that the normal t turned into a t. Other arguments come from loanwords, how Semitic words were borrowed into other languages, how they were written in other languages. Egyptian probably also had sounds like t and ch and things like that, and those are used to write these sounds when they have Canaanite loanwords. And there's also grammatical arguments. I'm not sure if this word actually occurs in Akkadian, but if you have a word like tzaduka, he was righteous, it's kind of hard work to make those t and k after each other, so then that would get simplified to saduka or zaduka or something like that. That's easier to understand if it's a sound that takes a lot of energy, like a t or a k, while if it was more like a s and a q and a t, like in Arabic, that use of the throat tends to spread over the whole word. So there you'd expect actually consonants to become emphatic rather than stop being emphatic near another emphatic consonant, if that makes sense. So for every feature of this pronunciation, it's a combination of what's the more likely direction of change, what do we know from how words were borrowed and how they were written as well, and what other kind of language internal rules are there about what sounds can occur together in the same word, how do they change in certain grammatical forms, things like that.
Dr. Suchard, do you know where the Proto-Semitic come from?
In terms of geography, not so much. It's an open question. But linguistically, Semitic is part of a bigger macro family, as it's called, a phylum of languages known as Afroasiatic, a term that was coined because Semitic was largely spoken in Asia, but the other families in this group are all spoken in Africa. And the ones that belong to this family are ancient Egyptian and Coptic, its descendant. Sometimes people think that that's a Semitic language. It's not, it's related, but it's definitely its own thing. There's the Berber or Amazigh or Tamazight languages in North Africa. Then there's the Chadic languages in Northwest Africa. Hausa is the biggest and best known of those. And then in mostly Ethiopia and surrounding countries further to the south and where Semitic is spoken, we have the Cushitic languages. So Somali is one of those, Oromo is another big one. That's a very big and diverse group as well. And maybe the so-called Omotic languages, also in Ethiopia, are also Afroasiatic, but I hear that that's controversial. And all of these languages share some things, especially in the way the verb is inflected and in the way pronouns like I, you, he look. Also some things about nouns that are too close to be a coincidence. So you can look at a Cushitic language like Beja especially, which has a very archaic verbal system. Like the prefix in the verb for me is, for I is a, you is ta, he is ya, something like that. Sounds just like any Semitic language you might look at. And Berber has the same things in the verb Hausa has something very much like it. So all of these different language families are related at an even deeper level, which might even be as old as 10,000 years ago, because like I said, one of these languages is ancient Egyptian, one of these families, because Egyptian forms a family by itself. I think the oldest Egyptian texts are something like 5,000 years old, the pyramid texts. And there we already see, okay, this is clearly very different from Semitic, very different from what we reconstruct for Proto-Berber or Proto-Cushitic. So we need a few more millennia for this oldest form of Egyptian to drift away from Proto-Afroasiatic. In terms of vocabulary, if we want to put, let's say, a speaker of Riffian Berber together with someone who speaks modern Aramaic and see how many words they recognize, you're going to have a bad time, because there's very few words that reconstruct for Proto-Afroasiatic. For some reason, the word for to die seems to be something with mut everywhere. The word for tongue has a lot of words that look the same, and that's pretty much it. Maybe if you try really hard, you can find about 20 words. But that's probably because so much more time has passed, and the inflection of the verb and the pronoun is more stable, so that got kept while the words, the vocabulary got renewed. But sometimes looking at these other Afroasiatic languages can actually tell us more about the history of Semitic. We can go a bit further back than Proto-Semitic by looking at this. One example I personally like a lot is if we look at the plural endings of the noun. So we have im and ot in Hebrew. In classical Arabic, that's una and at. And those are throughout Semitic. There's reasons to say that originally that wasn't a long vowel, u and e, but it was a short vowel with a w before. So what ends up as im in modern Hebrew used to be we, or wima, or wina, or something like that, and wuna in the nominative. And the at that becomes ot in Hebrew used to be what. So a w for the plural with the at of the feminine. And that looks just like the ancient Egyptian form, where the plural in the masculine is written with a w, and in the feminine it's written with a w and a t. So there we find confirmation that a form that you can reconstruct by taking Proto-Semitic as it's reflected in the different Semitic languages, thinking really hard about what might be an even older form, that reconstruction then gets confirmation from the broader Afroasiatic picture. So that's something that I find very exciting. If you want to know where Semitic as a language family comes from, statistically I guess it's most likely that it comes from Africa, where the rest of Afroasiatic is spoken. Some people instead think, no, Semitic stayed here, and speakers of all the other Afroasiatic families migrated to Africa in different waves, maybe. But at that time scale, it's just so hard to say at this point. Maybe in future archaeology and especially genetic research can tell us more about that. But for now, we're limited by where the historical record starts.
We learned so much today about Semitic languages. Dr. Suchard, thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're hoping to see you next time on the Kedem channel.
Looking forward to it.